Have you ever noticed that those with the greatest spiritual power struggle with lust? You can look throughout history and look at spiritual teachers, healers, those that are politicians in great power. Always are challenged with their sexual energy. And you ever wonder why that pattern exists? Well, today I'm going to break down the 5 reasons why those that are on the higher path struggle with lust. Welcome to the Great Men Are Built channel. I'm Matthew Manning, just out for a walk with my wife, and I help shy, introverted men in their 30s get into long-term relationships. So let's break down the 5 reasons why the chosen ones struggle with lust. So number one, and before we go into it, I want to share a quick story of my own journey with lust. So I'm in Vancouver, downtown Vancouver, and I get sober and I completely lose my ability to talk to women. And through that time period, I went through a really strange identity shift and I completely lost myself. And it was very, very difficult. And from there, I didn't like how much sexual energy was inside my system. Because one thing, what happens when you start to get sober, if you ever decide to get sober, you're going to waken up a lot of power, especially spiritual power. And something that I noticed when I got sober is that I was extremely lustful. And because I wasn't outletting in alcohol anymore and cocaine, I became like extremely lustful. And I didn't like it. And then I also had a challenge with looking at things on the internet, and you know what I'm talking about. And that I didn't like that it had this power over me. I didn't like that the lust had all this power over me, and I wasn't in control of myself. So I went celibate, and I studied this, and I studied my body. I studied the sexual energy, and I studied this quite deeply. I started reading books like Cultivating Masculine Energy through Sexual Kung Fu. I started looking into Tantra, all this type of stuff during that time period. And at some point, my lust broke, and I broke my celibacy, and I went in and started hooking up with a bunch of women again. Then, a second time, when I was 29, I went on this powerful spiritual journey, and I needed to cleanse my system in order to attract my ideal woman. And this was after I lived in Vegas on and off for 2 years. So I cleansed myself. So I have a lot of experience with lust. I have a lot of experience on the higher path with spirituality, and it's really not easy. So the number one thing you got to understand about lust as being a spiritually aware person on the higher path is that this spiritual sensitivity, when you awaken your spiritual powers, what happens is it awakens your sexual energy. Now, I want to break down 2 drives that we have, 2 core drives. The first main core drive that we have as human beings is the biological one, the one that we want to survive, right? The one that keeps us alive. That's why you can see like sometimes I'm in Vancouver, you see quite a few homeless people. That's why you can see they're still here, because that core drive to be here is innate within our wiring. So that's our first core drive. But the second core drive is to reproduce, is through sexual energy. So sexual energy and creative energy, that's why you see people that are famous always get into sexual relationships and have multiple women. You see famous guys, right? Because creative energy and sexual energy are 2 of the same. So the challenge is, because they're 2 of the same, think about it. When you go to have a child, you're creating a child, right? You create through life force energy, and that energy is really close to sexual energy. And so what happens is, if you don't have a spiritual practice, it's really hard to tell the difference. And so if you read the book Think and Grow Rich, he talks about this a whole chapter in sexual transmutation. And so those that heighten their awareness heighten their sexual energy. And what happens is, when you heighten your sexual energy, or you heighten your spiritual awareness, you start to open yourself up to more light and more dark. And that dark energy starts to run your body. And you become aware. That's why I can remember on the path, especially when I first got started on my spiritual path, it was running me, like completely running me. And so I was opening myself up to the dark. Next, what happens is, what I noticed when I got sober And then when I got celibate, is that I opened up my awarenesses to feel more. And something I often say to people is that if you want to be sober, you have to be brave. You have to be brave to feel. And I can tell you this much, and by coaching a bunch of men through this, those that decide, you don't have to be fanatical about this, but those that decide to do this journey sober accelerate their results by tenfold. And it's because you're drinking because you want what's called liquid courage, right? But why do you need liquid courage? Well, you're afraid to feel something. And that's what most of us are. That's why we smoke, drink, escape, and do all these things, because we're afraid to feel. So you have to be brave to feel. Now, one of the things when you awaken your sensitivity, your spiritual sensitivity, what happens is sexual energy is a strength. But like anything, if you don't know how to cultivate it, if you don't know how to harness it, it's going to be harmful for you. So you need to learn the practice of transmutation and understand that. And I do this because they're so close to each other, sexual energy and creative energy. They're like intertwined. You need to understand the difference of both and how to use them. So for example, I woke up today with creative energy inside my system. Now, I could channel that with my wife, or I could channel that energy into this video. And that's why you often see men typically in their later 30s, early 40s, start to become successful, is because they've learned how to cultivate their energy. And what happens is their hormones aren't running them as deeply, right? Because when you're at sexual peak as a man at 23, whereas a woman's sexual peak at 34, when that happens, you're able to contain your system and navigate it. So this is very important to understand. These are key concepts to understand. Next, what happens is when you're walking the path of spirituality, it's an isolating path. You know, you're doing something that is a little different than the average person. And when that happens, that can feel isolating. And so when you feel isolated, what starts to happen is you start to seek sexual connections. You start to seek connections in general, right? But you got to understand, I can tell you this much from my own experience. It's been extremely isolating. A lot of times I've had to really, I've dealt with a lot of loneliness. Even on the path of pursuing women, it was quite lonely because not many men, okay, think about it. Okay, look where I am right now. I'm in a small town in Canada. Who here is moving to Las Vegas to go learn this stuff? I want to ask you right now, would you move to Las Vegas to go learn this? I'm not saying you have to, by no means. In fact, I can accelerate your results. You can skip all that and skip all the garbage too. There's a lot of garbage there, a lot of darkness. You don't want to go down. See, the thing is what happens with this pickup stuff, it takes you to a dark place. We don't need to go there. You don't need to go there. You know, I went to the dark pit for you. You don't have to go there. So it's extremely isolating. So when you're isolated, you're wanting connection. And so what starts to happen is as you come on the spiritual path, you start to feel ashamed for your sexual desires. But this is a core human desire. It's just what you want to start to do is not be overridden by it. Your sexual energy starts to override you and you have no control over yourself. And that's not a place we want to be. So the next is that the spiritual growth attract sexual energy. So when you grow spiritually, it's going to start attracting sexual energy to you, which is very, very important to understand. So as you grow, as you become more light, you become more of a light being, your consciousness starts to turn on, your awarenesses start to turn on. What's going to start happening is the dark is going to start attacking you. And one of the quickest ways for dark energy to get to you or inside your system is through lust. And you look at this through pop culture and everything. We use lust as or sexual energy as a way to get through marketing. It's very, very powerful. You look at any rappers or anything, they're using this energy as a way to market, and it's very powerful energy. Now, the other thing that starts to happen is lust starts to, what starts to happen is lust starts to attack your focus. It starts to attack your vital energy and it starts to attack your purpose. So it can be very easy to get sidetracked. So I'll give you an example of how this happened in my life. When I basically, before Vegas, I went isolated in the jungle and I went on this spiritual path and I became like, I started studying a bunch about yoga. I started doing all my self practices. This is where really I started to begin understanding like the healing and how I help people heal through some of this, which I'm going to go to in my next point. And I went so deep in the jungle. I was so isolated in Costa Rica that I went so far to the light, I snapped and went to the dark. And so, ironically, I went from Costa Rica to back to my hometown for like 3 months, and then I went to Vegas. And so I went so far light, I went to the dark, right? And it was just like, yeah, it's a pretty extreme thing. And then I went from Vegas to India again, and then back to Canada and back to Vegas again. So pretty wild journey. But what starts to happen is this sexual energy starts to take you off your purpose. So I could feel that when I was in Vegas. I'm like, I'm not myself. I just don't feel myself. I don't, something doesn't, I'm just not, I'm just being someone that I'm not. I'm being incongruent to my character. This is not what I stand for. This is not why I got sober. This is not why I'm on this path. But it was super confusing to me because I looked at all these guys online and I'm like, well, this is what they're portraying. This is the marketing. This is the life that they're portraying. You look at guys online and they use women as a way to get to your core desire. And it worked on me and I got hypnotized. But what started to happen is I went to the belly of the beast and went to that pit of darkness and realized that it's all a facade and that you don't need to chase these phantoms. And that's the thing. A lot of people are chasing phantoms, which is really not ideal. So one of the things you got to understand is that the lustful energy is going to take you off your purpose. And so that's why the kingdom within is granted to those that have discipline. So that's what we got to start cultivating. And so what starts to happen in number 4 is what starts to happen is unhealed wounds seek sexual expression. Okay. So if you have trauma, you have heartbreak, what starts to happen is it manifests as a sexual desire. So you can see this all the time. One of the things when you look at how a person wants to have sex, it basically, there's all different styles of it and ways to have it, but you'll often see as people get older, it gets rougher and tougher. And it's because pleasure is right close to where the pain is in our brain. And so that's why you kind of see that kind of back and forth where it gets really fine line between, is this good or healthy, or is this like hurting? And so what starts to happen is we want to escape that pain and relive it. And so there's a sexual trauma that gets released when we start to have it with someone else. So we got to be mindful of that. These wounds want to express themselves through sexual desire. And number 5, someone with a spiritual gift. I have one of them. You probably have one. That's why you're here. That's why we're attracted to each other. Comes with strong sexual energy. So I've had a lot of sexual energy inside my system, like override, like too much. Like, I think that's partly why I was like, think about what I was driven to do. Like, it was so bad that, and I had so much energy inside my system that I went to Vegas to go learn this stuff. Like, I bought a one-way ticket, which is really crazy. So when you have a strong spiritual gift, I was also told by one of my mentors, someone that decides, who's an alcoholic, decides to get sober. The reason that someone has a challenge with alcoholism is because they're very highly spiritually aware. Now, I'm not claiming all this stuff. It's not anything crazy or anything. It's just I have a heightened awareness. I think that this awareness is what makes me such a good coach, because I can tune into my clients before they even fully say what they're saying. I can tune into them and I can just reflect, and I can see exactly where they're blocked, and I can also see where they need to go. And it just happens intuitively. I can pick up on it. And then my brain, the way my brain's shaped for seeing patterns. So I can, because I've worked with so many clients and I've worked with so many men, I've done all this myself and I've been in this industry for quite a long time. I can see patterns really quickly and unlock them. And one of the things that I always say to men, when you decide to go on this journey to really understand man to woman communication, you're basically putting your hand up saying, I want to learn psychology, because you're going to become a master of psychology when you start to understand man to woman communication, and you're going to become the top 5% of men in the planet. Now, I want to ask you this. If you were to become the top 5% of men on this planet, how would your life be different? What would change for you? If you were to start understanding stuff, what's going to change when you talk to your mom, when you talk to your auntie, you talk to your cousin, your sister, if you plan to have daughters or you have a wife? Like, this stuff is so important, and so many men completely misunderstand this stuff. So if you're a shy, introverted man and you're struggling with some of this, you're in a good position, because if you just spend a little bit of time, it doesn't take much, you just dedicate a little bit of time to understanding this information, your life will be forever changed. And now what starts to happen, I got a client that it has his own sales company, and he's learning sales for the first time. And he's saying, Matthew, I noticed that my uh, sales are increasing. I noticed that my communication is increasing with my business partners. I have another client that also said this, like, Matthew, this is incredible. At work, it's so much easier to talk to people. I'm able just to have conversations, and I don't really know what's changing, but something's happening to me. And I'm like, well, yeah, what starts to happen is when you study this stuff, there's an overlap. There's an overlap of what starts to happen when you start studying this. And that becomes very, very powerful, because not just studying this stuff for you to get your own outcome, which is to get into a long-term relationship, but when you study this man to woman communication, you start to understand this stuff, it can become very powerful. So if that's you and you want support in this, click the link below. Let's jump on a call. Let's see if you're a fit for some coaching, and let's explore how to actually start getting the results that you're looking for in your life. Now, just to finalize this video, lust is nor good nor bad. It's just energy. Energy is nor good nor bad. Neither is light, neither is dark. They're the same energy just on the other side. When you come above the veil, is what they talk about it in spirituality, which I've actually not fully experienced yet. I know it from a theoretical, but I'm not an experiential. When you come above the veil, you understand that north needs south, south needs north. And you look on a battery, they have two poles. But those two poles are what make up the whole battery. When you understand that there's no good nor bad energy, it becomes very powerful. But what we do want to do is we want to not be overridden by unconscious energy. And this is very important. So if you're struggling with lust, start to consider these points that we've made today, and have that awareness of why this is running your system, why you're being overran by this, and not feeling ashamed for it. Because I can tell you, I've studied this for a very long time, and I was very upset by how I was being ran by this. I had no control over my will. I had no control over my system. I had no control over who I was. And it completely upset me, and it made me really frustrated. I felt shame. I was angry. And then I took it out on women as well. It's just not good. It wasn't healthy. So if that's you, I empathize with you and understand. So let me know in the comments below what resonated with you, which part are you struggling with, and where do you need more support. All right, with that, take care. Much love.